One of the most difficult parts about sports is the pain that comes from losing. When you've got your hopes up, when you're excited, when you have something within your grasp and it's ripped away at the last second. It's difficult. It's hard to swallow. It's what makes sports both beautiful and painful and exciting and yet difficult. And I'm going to try to tie together what we witnessed with the US men's national soccer team in the World Cup to what could or could not happen with the Cincinnati Bengals this fall. Let's get started. Hi, hello, and welcome into episode number 192 of the Ball Don't Lie podcast. My name is Austin Elmore. I am your host. Thank you for being here. If you'll allow me, I have a couple of thoughts on the United States men's national team before I get into the Bengals. So the FIFA World Cup is happening right now, and the USA just got eliminated in the round of 16 matchup against Belgium, and they really played poorly. It was a 4-1 loss. They made a bunch of mental mistakes. They were not decisive. They were hesitant. They didn't really look prepared. I don't know that they lost because Belgium was so much better than them. I think they lost because of a bunch of self-inflicted errors and because they couldn't get out of their own way more than anything. And that was a difficult loss to swallow because it felt like this was the American team that had the best chance to go deep and to go far into that tournament and flirt with something crazy, flirt with a Cinderella-like run. And they really had been fun to watch for the most part in this World Cup. I mean, dominant in the group stage, except for one game, which they didn't play any of their starters hardly at all. Found a way to beat Bosnia 2-0, despite going down a man for 30 plus minutes in the second half. Like, that was a fun team, and it was a team that the United States was falling in love with and had fallen in love with over the last couple of weeks. And I've been thinking a lot about like the 4th of July. And first of all, I hope you had a great 4th of July holiday and you got to experience it. I thought it was really cool. All the different celebrations across the United States for the 250th anniversary of us declaring our independence over Britain. And, I've been thinking a lot about that. I've been watching American Revolutionary War documentaries. I've been reading kind of about the early informative years of the United States. And it really is such a young country when you think about it. And it's amazing when you compare that to some of the other countries in the world and these established governments and the way that they've done things and how for 250 years, which is really minuscule compared to some of these other countries, we've been able to stand on this Declaration of Independence, on this Constitution that we wrote, on this Bill of Rights about what we believe and who we are. And while it's a very small amount of time in the grand scheme of things, it should be celebrated. And when you think of all the things in that short amount of time that we've been able to accomplish in 250 years, whether it's advancements in data, in developing the smartphone or farming technology or going to the moon and establishing a space program that was so successful, overcoming wars that happened, the Revolutionary War for one, the Civil War, which was the deadliest war in American history, and for us to come to that almost destroyed the Union to begin with. We've had presidents assassinated. We've had all sorts of things that have happened to try to kind of shake us from this core of who we are and what we believe in and what our whole process is like going forward. But we've also had incredible accomplishments in those 250 years. And I was trying to think, every 4 years we kind of do this with the men's national team, where we get our hopes up and something like this happens. And I was trying to think, like, why do we keep doing this? And, obviously it's a little bit different this time around because the men's World Cup is here. It's on US soil. And so that for one, it's just in people's face more and we're talking about it more and it's all over TV. And that's a good thing. I think that's important. It was good for the game in 1994 when it was here. It's going to be good for the game now when it's here, even if the United States doesn't advance far into the tournament. But the point I'm trying to make here is that much like everything else in the foundation and the core principles and beliefs and things that we've done within our country, we like it when somebody says we can't do something and we go and do it. We like it when we are competing and being competitive with other countries to accomplish certain things. And if there's something specifically that we don't think or we've been told that we're not good at or we can't do, we really want to do that thing. We are really competitive. We really want to prove you wrong. just like going to the moon. We want to be that first country to do this, the first country to do that. We want to take the power. We want to develop into the most powerful country in the world, even though we're the youngest country of the world, essentially. And then boom, 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 all these different things over the course of time. And I think that's why we love the men's national team, because it's not our sport. It's not the thing we care about the most. It's not something that we'd dump a bunch of money into and to try to develop. It's not like we have perfectly encapsulated the right way to develop these national team players. And it's not something that we're known for. We're known for football. We're known for basketball. We're known for these other sports. And there's all these different aspects that go into it that I'm not going to bore you with today. And when it comes to youth academies and payments, and not all that important to this particular podcast, but I think as Americans, we really want to stick it to you if you don't think we can do something. And that's why I think we kind of push all of our marbles in behind the men's national team, because nobody thinks we're going to win. Nobody ever expects us to win. And then when we finally get a group where it's like, okay, these guys are pretty good. These guys could go on a run here. We put all of our faith and all of our belief behind that. And I think it's just because we're competitive and because we like to prove people wrong. And there's a serious, a long list of things, a series of events is what I was going to say, that you could go through over the course of American history where it's like, yeah, actually, we can do that, or we will do that. And we did do that. And I think that's kind of like a little bit why this American spirit kind of kicks in when it comes to the men's national team, even though they're not favored, even though they've never really cracked the top 10 in terms of the best soccer teams in the world. And oftentimes they've been eliminated in the round of 16. It's difficult the way they played in that game to lay a stinker like that. I mean, that just sucks, quite frankly. But I do think it's cool when everybody comes together to celebrate that team. And of course, at the end, it got divisive because that's where we are. And that's one of the things that really hasn't changed over the last 250 years is that we get mad about stupid shit and everyone wants to fight each other. But when we do come together for a common goal, it's fun to see. And it was fun to watch that and experience that run. I wish it would have gone a little bit longer, but I do think it was a cool backdrop to have that next to the 250th anniversary of our country and the celebrations going on all over the place. It was really cool to see. It was fun. And hopefully the men's national team can overcome these issues and finally break through the round of 16 in the future in 2030, which I think it's going to be in Africa in 2030. That'll be exciting. All right, let's get to the football. Let me have a cup of coffee here. So Bengals hype this season is at an all-time high, right? Like everywhere I go, people want to say, what do you think about the Bengals this year? I loved what the Bengals did this offseason. Hey, Bengals are going to get back to the playoffs, blah, 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 blah. And I love that. And I agree. Like, I think the Bengals are going to be a good team. I'm all in on the belief that they can be a really good team. But to go back to the opening point of the show, sports is pain. And there are always something that happens, always something that crops up, always something that's unexpected, like a red card to Flo Balogun, that could derail this entire run. And we've seen this happen repeatedly at times. I think back to the 2023 team. Bengals had started to turn things around towards the second half of the season, and Joe Burrow was starting to heat up. And on that Thursday night in Baltimore, they had the lead when Joe Burrow destroyed his wrist. And it made me wonder, man, if they had gone on to win that game, would we have seen that Bengals team go deep into the playoffs again for the third consecutive year? Well, they missed the playoffs that year and they haven't been back since. And finally, there's been an offseason worthy of feeling like, okay, I'm going to get back to those days of 21 and 22. But really in 23, that injury derailed that whole season. You look back at 2024, Joe Burrow was the best quarterback in the NFL that year, in my opinion. Jamar Chase won the Triple Crown. It was elite offensive production, but maybe the worst defense in the NFL. That defense derailed the hopes of the 24 Bengals. 25 happens, and Joe has turf toe after the first 2 weeks. Still a really bad defense. Those two things derailed the 2025 Bengals. And so I was trying to think, okay, when everything seemingly has gone right this offseason for the Bengals, I'm not trying to be a pessimistic outlook. What are the things that could go wrong for them that could lead to derailment of the 2026 Bengals season? Where are the blind spots? Where are the weak points? What are the things we need to be aware of going into this season? And maybe this is just trying to protect myself from eventual pain. Maybe this is me trying to just pump the brakes a little bit on the expectations. Maybe this is me just trying not to get too excited, right? Trying to protect myself from something and then it ultimately not happening. So there's a few different things that I think could derail the Bengals season. And let me start by this. I don't want these things to happen. I'm not rooting for these things to happen. I very much want the Bengals to be very good and very healthy and go into this season and win the AFC North and go back into the playoffs and go on a deep run and win the Super Bowl. There is nothing on the planet I want more than the Bengals to win the Super Bowl. I hope we are abundantly clear on that. However, I've never seen a perfect season. Something always goes wrong for all 32 teams. And I'm sure that something will go wrong for the Bengals this season. What are the most vulnerable places that this team has? Let's talk about it. Well, first and foremost, the most obvious one is an injury to Joe Burrow. Just talked about two of the last three examples have been injuries to Burrow that have derailed the season. I don't think obviously the idea of Joe Burrow being injury prone is pretty common. He has had some weird fluky injuries. There have not necessarily been injuries that are his fault, from an appendectomy to a calf strain, and maybe the calf strain was his fault for practicing on it, to getting bodies pushed into him that tore up his knee, to a never before seen wrist injury that hadn't even happened in any quarterbacks in the past. Like, it's just been weird, fluky stuff. And so I don't know if that qualifies for injury prone, but injuries are a part of his story. And so for that reason, you have to look and say, okay, can he stay healthy? Now, the Bengals are better built to withstand a Joe Burrow injury than they have been in years past. I do think the defense is better. I'm comfortable with Joe Flacco as the backup quarterback. They still have weapons on offense, no doubt about it. But I believe Joe Burrow is the best quarterback in the NFL. And if you lose him, that's going to hurt your odds significantly. And that's going to change the way defenses play you. And so, for that reason, the most obvious one is an injury to Joe Burrow. If Burrow plays all 17 games this year, I don't see a way that the Bengals aren't winning at least 12 of them. Just looking at the schedule, just looking at the opponents, just looking at how this roster is built, I would expect them to win at least 12 if Joe Burrow is healthy for all 17. So that's the first thing that could derail the season. Number two would be an injury to the defensive backs of any kind. That defensive backfield, that defensive room is very, very thin, and it's corners and safeties combined. So let's start with the cornerback room. It's very top heavy with Dax Hill or with DJ Turner. There's a bit of a drop off before you get to Dax Hill. Those are your two starting outside corners. Dax Hill coming off of an ACL last year, DJ Turner coming off of a career year where he's going to be negotiating a contract this year to get him paid like one of the top cornerbacks in the NFL. I don't know if he's going to get that type of money, but he played like that for the better part of last season. After that, you have Jalen Davis, who is primarily a nickel, Takario Davis, who is a rookie and never played and going to be an outside guy, Josh Newton, who simply hasn't been the guy that they hoped he would be when they drafted him a couple of years ago, Jasir Taylor, who's primarily a special teamer and nickel guy, DJ Ivey, who also hasn't really panned out. I don't know if he has the athleticism to play on the outside. Braylon Lux, Jalen Kimber, and Sierra Wright. That is a very, very top heavy room, and it gets really, really thin really quickly. So if one of those top two guys goes down, you're asking a lot of Takario Davis, who's a rookie. You're asking a lot of Josh Newton. You're asking a lot of the guys who are behind them. So let's go to the safety room. You obviously have Brian Cook, who they signed in free agency, and you have Jordan Battle. Those are your two starters. The three guys behind them, Kyle Duggar, Dejon Anthony, PJ Jules. Go further down the depth chart, you've got Russ Yeast and Isaiah Wokobia. I don't even know if I said his name right. He's an undrafted free agent. I mean, just that is kind of astounding when you think about how top heavy those two rooms are, cornerback and safety for this team. And so an injury or multiple injuries to that defensive backfield scares me because it just doesn't feel very deep. And so the strength of the team is now the defensive line and the rotation and the pressure that they can put on the quarterback. No doubt about that. And that in and of itself is going to help that room. And if somebody gets hurt in that room, it is going to help alleviate the pressure on them. However, that's still not a very deep room. Period, point blank, full stop. That room needs help. And I hope the Bengals are considering adding depth to that room and some sort of veteran experience that whatever they can. I don't even know who all is out there that's available. That concerns me. And that's the type of stuff that it's like, man, if one or two of those guys goes down, offenses across the NFL are going to pick on the weakest link of the defense, and the weakest link all of a sudden becomes corners. And there's a lot of good quarterbacks and a lot of good receivers in this league that can go after those corners. That's a concern to me. Number three, kind of connected to number one, is an injury to the Bengals offensive line, and specifically an injury to the Bengals tackles. Now, keeping Joe Burrow upright, as we just talked about, is incredibly important, and it's going to be the key to the season. The Bengals don't have depth at their tackle position right now. First and foremost, your two starting tackles are Orlando Brown Jr. and Amarius Mims. Mims on the right, Brown on the left. Orlando Brown Jr. at times last year looked old, looked out of shape, looked like somebody who was aging in his career. And I think the Bengals have challenged Orlando Brown Jr. to get in better shape coming into this season because he just wasn't in good enough shape last year. And as you get older, you got to be really hyper aware of those things because life comes at you fast in the NFL. And so the backup tackle right now is Cody Ford. That's it, basically. You've got Andrew Coker, you've got Corey Robinson, you've got Javon Foster, you've got Christian Jones. They drafted Brian Parker, who played tackle in college, but the Bengals don't plan on using him outside. Like Jalen Rivers, maybe, but there's a lot of inexperience and not a lot of depth at those two tackle positions. And Marius Mims, unfortunately, is also somebody who has had injuries and missed times in the past. And we saw it last year when Mims went down for a little stretch. Cody Ford came in and it did not look very good. When Orlando Brown went down for a little stretch, Cody Ford came in and it did not look very good. The Bengals like Cody Ford, and he does provide positional versatility, but as a tackle, I'm worried about Cody Ford. That's a position where it's really, really scary, as is center, by the way. And this is nothing against Ted Karras, but he's also an aging veteran. And there were times over the past couple of years where he looked like and played like an aging veteran. And behind him, you have Connor Lew, who is coming off of a major injury. Brian Parker maybe could play that. Jacob Bear is at the very bottom of the depth chart. It's very thin at those positions. And an injury to one of those, and injuries happen across the offensive line. The Bengals were really lucky last year with the continuity that they had on that group or for that group over the course of the season. I just have legitimate concerns about that. So those are like the three injury things. Obviously, Burrow, the defensive backs, and the offensive line. And the offensive line and Burrow are all kind of connected. But what about the football things? What are the football stuff? What's the football stuff that could derail this team? Well, outside of the depth concerns, what if the linebackers don't take a step? What if all this hype and all this bet and this gamble that the Bengals have taken on fixing the defensive line and that front seven and the rotating pieces, if that whole gamble doesn't result in better linebacker play? What if Barrett Carter doesn't take a step forward? What if Demetrius Knight Jr. doesn't take a step forward? Oh, by the way, that's another position where you could look at the depth of that room and be like, yikes. Because it's Joe Giles Harris, Oren Burks, Liam Anderson, Shaka Hayward. Not very good. But that's not the point here. If those linebackers don't take a step forward, and they are the weak link of the defense, let's say DJ Turner and Dax Hill, and that secondary is playing really well. Let's say the defensive line is solid and improving. Well, and your two biggest weaknesses are your linebacker. Now, you're going to try to hide that a little bit with your defensive scheme, but teams are still going to go after those guys, try to take advantage of them, and create situations in which you go at the weakest link on the Bengals defense. That's going to happen. And so if those two guys don't take a step, the Bengals defense once again has a major hole in it and is a weakness. That could derail the Bengals season. Same thing with Dexter Lawrence. What if Sexy Dexy is not the Sexy Dexy of a couple of years ago when he was a second team All-Pro? What if he's the Dexter Lawrence of last year, in which he didn't really have a good season? He had just half a sack, and there were maybe injury concerns. What if he's a guy who is just a guy, what we call JAG, just a guy? What if Dexter Lawrence is not a difference maker? What if he's just okay? What if he gets hurt and it's all on TJ Slayton to be the guy in the middle? Now I feel like there's concern about being able to stop the run up front. These are the things that could derail the season. And these are all big ifs. The other thing is on offense, what if they can't run the ball consistently? Talk a lot about explosive plays, talked about how good the Bengals running game was in the second half of last season. It took them a while to get going, but if teams are going to play this too high shell on you consistently, and teams are going to take away what you do best with Jamar and T, and they're going to basically beg you to run the ball, and they don't care if you run it or not, you've got to be able to run the ball effectively and gash them in that way to open up other parts of your offense. What if the Bengals can't consistently run the ball again? What if there are issues running out of shotgun? What if there are issues running under center? What if a Chase Brown injury happens and you don't have that home run threat in your backfield? Running the ball consistently this year, I think, is going to be so important to the Bengals' offensive production and what it forces defenses to do against them. I can't understate that enough. I think it leads to more explosives, and I think you'll have more explosives in the run game. But if you can't do that consistently, if there is a scheme issue, if there is an injury, if there is something defenses are doing in which they're just overpowering the offensive lineman in front of you, and these two things also connected to that previous point about the offensive line, that I think can get really ugly for the Bengals. And I have an honorable mention as well is poor special teams play. There's going to be a battle this training camp for the kick returner job, for the punt returner job. They've signed Ryan Rico to be the punter, and they've signed Evan McPherson to be the kicker. And I think there's a lot of confidence for the most part in those two guys. But what if there's a poor special teams season? What if Evan McPherson isn't the weapon he was a couple of years ago? What if he is declining? What if Ryan Rico has an off year? What if there's no threat in the kick or punt return game, or if there's just in general, because of the lack of depth in the positions that I talked about earlier, especially linebacker, safety, and corner, if there's just poor play on that special teams? That could be something that, all three phases of the game are incredibly important. You need all three phases to play well consistently, and special teams can derail a team. It can derail a game, and that could ultimately derail a season. I'm not trying to say all this to be negative, but I am just trying to look at it from a realistic thing. It's like, okay, they've had a really good season. We're all really excited about it, but here's the things that could hurt them. Here's where they're still weak. Here's where there's vulnerabilities. Here's where, and injuries are obvious. I understand that without a doubt. But the other things about, the linebackers not taking a step, Dexter Lawrence, if he's just a guy, and not being able to run the ball, those are things that worry me about how do we get from where we have been to where we want to go if you're the Bengals. So those are the things I think about when it comes to potentially derailing the hype around the Bengals season. All right, that does it for me. Thank you so much for listening and watching. And if you haven't already, I invite you to subscribe to this podcast anywhere you get your podcast, including on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcast, Spotify. You can also watch along on YouTube at Ball Don't Lie Pod, where I have videos up every single week of the show. All right, that does it for me. If you liked what you heard, you can hear me weekdays noon to 3 on ESPN 1530. I co-host Cincy 360 and invite you to listen to that. And I'm not sure what we're going to talk about next time on the show. We'll probably get into some training camp stuff, look at maybe some training camp battles, some of those positions throughout. I'm not sure exactly what we'll get to, but training camp is coming soon, and I'm very, very excited for that. All right. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you again soon. As always, have fun, be safe, go Bucks.